Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Conversations in the Future of Work. I'm really excited about this episode. I met this amazing individual, Gideon, at an ICF conference last fall, and we hit it off immediately. And so it felt only natural to have him on the show to share his very unique experience in the coaching space. And so, without further ado, Gideon, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm Gideon Culman. I'm the founder of K Street Coaching, which is an executive coaching facilitation firm in Washington, D.C. I've been leading this since 2012 and seen a lot of changes to the coaching industry over that time. What else can I tell you about myself or my practice that would be of interest to your listeners?
Well, we're definitely going to get into a lot of your work, I think. But
Okay.
if there's anything you're particularly excited about right now that you're working on, that can always be interesting to share.
Um, what I love doing, there are just so many ways to come at coaching and leadership development, but one of the ways that I've really loved innovating and playing jazz is weaving Lego serious play facilitation into the work that I do. This year, I've done it for large groups at Marriott International. Earlier this month, Georgetown University convened a huge group of leaders from the World Bank, the IMF, a bunch of regional development banks, and we were able to deftly weave Lego serious play based facilitation into that just completely shifted the dynamics of the room when we were using that. And it made a very big impression on everyone there, including top bank leadership. And so I just love how allowing people to see conversations that flow differently from how we're used to having them can be a real eye-opener.
Awesome. Absolutely. Really bringing out that inner child and inner playfulness is such a powerful tool. So
Well,
fantastic.
and I want to push back on that. It's not about inner child and inner playfulness. It's about
Yeah.
taking abstract thinking that we have a hard time articulating and making it concrete so that we can tell a story with a model in front of us, and in so doing, just be understood better by the person who's sitting across from us,
Yeah.
or the people sitting around a table, and so I think a lot of really good ideas get lost because we're trying to articulate abstract ideas in purely verbal
Yeah.
conversations. And so this is a way to skirt that and actually be seen.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's great. Um, Very interesting. So I am fascinated by the work that you do, particularly within the context, right? You're at the epicenter of so much that's happening in the United States all the time, right?
Mhm.
Not just right now. And you work with some of the most senior leaders, whether that's C-suite, White House, global organizations. And I also find it's so easy for people to criticize those leaders, right? Oh, they did this and they didn't do that, and how could they, blah, blah, blah. But what do you find working with these leaders is specifically hard about the position they're in that most people underestimate?
Before I answer that, I want to say, as a proud American, we have the right to criticize these leaders, so knock yourselves out. But to answer your question, I think what most people who don't have these seats don't realize is it's kind of a tired trope that, when you're shouldering a lot of responsibility, when you're at the pinnacle of power, it's hard to be truly seen. It's hard to have people actually see you and hear you. But we don't often talk about the other side of that coin, which is, a former colleague of mine called it the Christmas tree principle. When you're at the top, you're looking down and all you see are these smiling faces. And if you're at the bottom looking up, all you see is assholes. And the problem with that is that it distorts the information that will get through to a senior leader. So someone who's really smart, really on top of things, has to make decisions based on the information that they're getting from people who may not be providing a full picture or a forthright picture because of the power differentials. And so I think that it's really, really, really important, if you hold a position like that, to be able to recognize that first and foremost, and actively, consistently, never not level the playing field so that people will come to you with information that doesn't distort your view of your area of responsibility.
Right. So specifically, it's that, is it the challenge that these leaders have in constantly trying to level that playing field in, like, while still holding this leadership position, um, in order to get a more complete picture of how people are feeling and thinking and, dealing with things?
The way you're phrasing that makes the assumption that they necessarily are, and I don't think that's a given. I think a lot of people will advance for decades initially on their subject matter expertise alone and never even consider or not give due consideration to what their impact is on the people around them. And that's something that a solid leader will always be working on, always figuring out, what am I bringing to the situation that's distorting the picture? What do I need to undo? What do I need to dismantle to prevent these distortions from occurring?
Right. Now, within coaching specifically, you've said that it's really just, it's not about fixing blind spots in this classic kind of sense. So what do you think actually happens? Like, let's say you're coaching one of these leaders. What would a good coaching session with a leader look like, or what might happen that goes beyond, discovering a blind spot?
When it comes to blind spots, I think the question lives in the paradigm of capability and smarts and things like that. A lot of leaders are smart, and that's how they got to be leaders. They smarted their way to the top. And the first time I ever heard about executive coaching, I was insulted. Someone was like, "Oh, maybe you should speak to a coach to address this thing that you're working on." And I'm like, "What? You don't think I can figure this out myself?" And I think that's one of the traps that we can fall into and think that it's just about blind spots. But I think rather than being an individual with a blind spot, we could also think of ourselves as containing multitudes, and a good coaching session will invite onto the stage all of the different facets of ourselves so that we can begin to consider them, so that we can cultivate a directorial presence, convening, or maybe like a conductorial presence to conduct like an orchestra of all the different parts that we bring to ourselves, whether it's past ways of being that we've had to abandon in order to lead in the way that we're leading today, who we are today, but also all of the different ways that we might continue to grow, versions of ourselves that we haven't even envisioned yet. Begin to envision those, begin to think through, what room do we need to make in our life today, or vis-a-vis who we've been in the past, in order to bring those versions of ourselves fully to fruition.
And would you say that also then lends itself to what you were saying earlier? Like, the more a leader can show up with the multifaceted, persona or person that they are, the easier it is to connect with other people, and therefore, have a conversation that's going to lead somewhere perhaps more honest.
Do you mind if I turn this back on you? Like, if you think of people who present a polished 2D persona, are you going to want to spend time with them, or are you going to want to spend more time with someone who that is 3D, has and owns their flaws and can speak about those in a way that allows you to own yours and allows you to bring all of the things that you're working on to the table, so that you can accomplish better things together, rather than constantly hiding who you are, constantly pretending that you are polished and perfect.
Yeah. Well, so the answer to the question is yes, right?
It's kind of rhetorical, but
Yeah.
I would love us to break out of the rhetorical framework. Like, we can all imagine that polished and perfect person who leaves us cold. And many of us can remember that polished and perfect person that we knew was not perfect, and that we hated working for and we couldn't wait to get away from.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I have a friend who just published a book about as leaders being a lot more vulnerable and that we're always afraid to overshare when in fact undersharing is a little bit more of an issue. So I think it's a fascinating phenomenon, right? That a lot
Yeah.
of us have to like work counter to because, you know, I think that we've spent so much time trying to always be putting our like best and most optimal foot forward.
I'll give you a fresh example because it happened yesterday. I was leading
Yeah.
a big workshop and I had someone who was helping me. And, I know how to make a room work all by myself, but I'm really grateful when there's someone there or multiple people there who can just make it work more easily. And so Leslie was passing out handouts, and Leslie was making sure that everything stayed on track. And then, as the person who was hosting me thanked me at the end of the workshop, he also acknowledged Lori, and I'm like, oh my God, I've been calling her Leslie this whole time. And so afterwards, I got up in front of the room full of leaders that I'd been getting to cop to the kind of thing that they wouldn't normally cop to. And I'm like, look, I want to put my money where my mouth is and apologize to Lori for misnaming her this whole time. And, we both looked like tomatoes in that moment, but I'd rather do that than pretend nothing happened.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, and I think it can be like my husband actually recently had a similar experience. He's in the wealth management industry, and typically in the wealth management industry, particularly when you're the one who's making decisions about your client's money and where it should and should not go,
Mm-hmm.
like you're never supposed to admit that you've made a mistake. Right. If a wrong move was made in retrospect, you're like, oh well, there was this issue or a piece of information or context that we couldn't have known, right? And therefore the market went the wrong way. And he's been working on this new fund, and he was telling a client who had participated in the beta version of this fund, like, we've learned a lot, we made mistakes, we've tightened up our processes, and we're ready to move forward. And his client was like, I don't think I've ever heard someone in like finance admit that they've made mistakes, which was really interesting because I think for him it felt very almost like a relief to have been able to like be a human about it.
And it's increasingly bewildering to me that this is mysterious because, as far as I'm aware, I've been reading about this for decades that like one should admit one's mistakes, one should, lead with the flaws. And yeah, it's still increasingly rare, even though it's almost cliched at this point that being polished and perfect is not going to get you very far.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, you said earlier, blind spots and coaching, and you mentioned some words like smarts, and like you
Mm-hmm.
smart your way to being a leader. I think self-awareness, which is another notion that you brought up, as we were preparing for this, but self-awareness is a critical part of the equation. It
Mm-hmm.
is often talked about as a skill that you can practice somehow alone. But in your experience, how does self-awareness actually develop?
I don't want to minimize the work that one can do alone. And I think that that's important, taking inventory, taking time to take inventory of what we know about ourselves and what we know is going on within us. And I'll pile on. I have a chapter that I contributed to the International Coaching Federation's coaching body of competencies and knowledge that makes a very emphatic case for, if you want to continue to develop, record yourself and listen to yourself. So that's still very much stuff that you can do alone. And I will never not tire of recommending that.
Yeah.
And to actually deal with your question head on, there's no replacement for being in conversation with another person and having them react to you and share their reaction. And if they're trained to do it well and have a lot of practice in doing it well, they're going to give you information about how you impact them that actually serves you. You know, when I'm interacting with my daughter and she hits the roof, which happens a lot, there isn't always really good information for me to work with. But as she gets older and can put words to what she's feeling, I know, oh, okay, this is something that I do that has a certain impact on her that I never would have guessed. And so the self-awareness piece is recognizing all of the different ways that our presence impacts people and learning how to manage that, caring about managing it. But I don't think that piece is something that someone's going to crack alone. You need reactions from other people communicated to you in a way that you can hear in order to actually go there. And that's what I think a coach who's worth their salt will provide.
Right. So when you were saying that if the other person has been trained and have developed in such a way that reaction or feedback can land, were you talking about someone in the role of coach or just literally anyone who you may be interacting with?
Literally anyone that you may be interacting with. I think that someone who's a coach will offer a clearer signal more consistently, but and this comes back to what we can do ourselves. We can cultivate the ability to learn from our surroundings how we're impacting people and what reaction they're having, including inviting them into conversation with us. By the time I work with someone who has a 360 that's revelatory, I think the problem with that is that they don't realize that most of that information is available to them at most times should they ask.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because there's a role, there are two roles, right, that you're touching on. There's my role as an individual to be able to be aware of other people's reactions and feedback and then what that might mean in interpreting it. And then there's a role on the other person's side to be giving either helpful feedback or reactions that are at least in line with what they're actually feeling, which is, I think, really hard. I think it's probably hard for both people. I can relate to it from the perspective of nonverbal communication. People tend to be really obsessed in nonverbal communication with decoding other people's behaviors. And then they're not actually spending as much time thinking about how their own nonverbal behaviors might be impacting or influencing other people's feelings of comfort or security or, threat.
Well, can we talk about that? Because that's super interesting. And I think that it comes back to the whole smarts paradigm I was talking about before. If only I can understand this language, this code, and crack it, I will, dominate other people. I've got some problems with people who like to go about dominating other people. But, what you're pointing to is that the real power, which isn't domination, lies in recognizing, oh, I'm communicating tons, whether I'm trying to or whether I'm not, and it's available for anyone who is putting two and two together to figure out. I could communicate a little bit more deliberately. I bring the weather, when I do this mindlessly, I can cut people off at the knees who depend on me. And in so doing, drive up, the cost of finding replacements because they're not going to want to stay around me.
Yeah. Yeah, like a perfect example is, you as a leader happen to work in an office that's climate controlled and you keep it really cold. And then all the women who come in are freezing. And you're like, why are all the rooms so closed around here? none of them are open to my ideas. And it's like, no, they're just straight up freezing. Like, right?
Oh, so it's like distorting the signal and time. I mean, this comes back to the first question
Yeah,
that you were asking. It's not
exactly.
just a power thing. It's blithely setting the climate in such a way that distorts how people hold themselves physically,
Yeah,
and then misreading what that even means. I mean,
right.
there are many ways to distort the field in which you're responsible for decision making, and the culture and the weather that you bring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so very, very interesting, and just very tricky to do, right? So, for many senior leaders, they've followed a playbook of sorts, which I feel like these days playbooks have all gone out the window. But oftentimes, or maybe for everyone right now, right, these playbooks that we kind of depended on stop working or don't feel as relevant. So, what does that moment look like from the inside, and how do you help someone through that once they kind of come to this moment of realization?
You're talking about playbooks flying out the window, but I think that this is, straight from the adult development playbook, where we amass a certain amount of capability and expertise, and that is something that carries us through until it just completely falls apart. And the way we've been educated, the way we've been brought up in organizations that have trained us, calls for certain types of behavior. And if you're capable of those, it generally means you're at odds with the behaviors that you need at the next levels of leadership. So I think what it looks like from the inside is being quite confident that you know what to do and that you know how to do it, and having all of those things that you're confident in just not work out all of a sudden, or maybe very slowly, but eventually it comes to a head. And what it can look like is personality clashes, and what it can look like is, what, my contributions are no longer valued here. I'm just going to find someplace else to bring my talents. But what it could also look like, with the right kind of partnership and the right kind of support, and L&D leaders listening, I'm calling you out here, if you provide the right conditions for people who are struggling in this way, they can step back, recognize that they're going through a shedding of a mental skin. Their mind is turning into something different, and with the right support, it can grow more nimble and into something that it wasn't before. But if you're not helping people in that way, it'll likely lead to frustration and exits. I'll present an anonymized case of someone that I remember working with 7 or 8 years ago, who was clearly undergoing textbook transition from a more conventional form of mind to something a little more nimble. And to answer your question about what it looks like, he thought he was the only person in the history of the world who'd ever undergone a transition like this. It feels intensely private. It feels intensely lonely. And what it requires is someone who can gently, without like beating someone over the head with a theoretical framework, helping them see that, no, this is normal. This is not the first time in the history of the world that this has happened. There's a way through this. You can't force it. That feels a little paradoxical. You have to kind of step off the accelerator in order to allow yourself to grow. But when you do, who you are, who shows up in the mirror, is a refreshingly different person.
I love that you said that, this question that I posed specifically about, a leader and their playbook being actually more of an intrinsically human experience, right? As we all make our way through our lives, we're constantly evolving to the next self, right? Which is built on the shoulders of our past identity. I think that it's always it can always feel very isolating when you're going through one of those big transitions. But I agree that it can be really helpful to remember that, yes, you're not alone. And a lot of people are having to, go through transitions like this and enter completely new worlds. But hopefully you have an amazing executive coach on your team to help you through that.
Yeah, the sales part of me is like, yeah, but I also want to acknowledge that not everybody does. And this may kind of bleed into where we're going to take this conversation next, but a lot of the time, the reasons for deploying coaching can be so misguided that it's like the CYA move before we let the person go, and it's not the let's throw an expensive resource at this person because we know that they're germinating and about to blossom into something infinitely more complex that will be an asset to our organization. That's a gamble. And it's a gamble that I wish more organizations took, because the people working in those organizations hold so much promise if they're nurtured in the right ways when they go through these moments that, I don't think I use this word, but they feel like crises, maybe to the individual and maybe to the people around them.
So when an organization does apply or employ an executive coaching strategy, so as to avoid this notion of checking the box, what would you want, or what do you feel senior leadership really needs to understand in order to get the most value?
I want to ground an answer for this conversation in experience I recently had teaching coach skills training to an organization that wasn't out to train coaches. They really just wanted the people to have the skills. And many of the people in this training came in, wink, wink, thinking that coach skills training would allow them to manipulate people a little more effectively. And someone who holds coach skills and the coaching core competencies as sacred, this is anathema to me. It's about partnership. It's about discovering what partnership can even mean. It's about creating spaciousness, learning to use one's presence in order to be more spacious, so that people can be their best selves, people can grow. But it's not just about the coachee. Like, as a partner, you get to be more spacious and you get to grow with other people. And so, coming back to your question, you need leadership who thinks like that. You need leadership who isn't trying to merely extract more value from a workforce. It's people who, best case scenario, are walking that path themselves of expansion and want to share that path of expansion with those around them. At any time it derails into manipulating people a little more effectively than our current tools allow, you're profaning the whole enterprise.
Yeah. I feel like it comes down to then the intention of really wanting to support someone in their own journey of, like, yes, self-exploration, development, intention, value, finding an alignment, right? Versus, I need this person. Like, even though obviously the hope from a business perspective would be like, so that then they can do X better for the company, right? It's like the underlying true reason has to be like to let go and allow that person to go through that journey, which I would imagine is kind of the opposite of what a lot of people want to do. To your point, they want to be able to whatever manipulator.
And I think it can be helpful as you come up with this approach to recognize that to some extent we all have our own little control freak tendencies, and we do want to control what the outcome's going to be,
Yeah.
but that all the human beings in your organization, whether they benefit from coaching directly or not, are people who have very bright and bold aspirations, and necessarily are people who have a shadow side that will rear its head when they're not getting some of their needs met, whether it's enough rest or enough focus. There are any number of reasons that people won't get their needs met, sometimes in their control, sometimes out of their control, but everyone is subject to this. And why coaching? To equip people to more adroitly and nimbly navigate being torn in these different directions.
A lot of what you described in terms of, trying to understand people's needs and when they're possibly unmet reminds me of how I think about, my son Charles, right? Like he has such specific needs, and he just, his behavior is so dependent on whether those basic needs are being met or not. And so this leads me to my last question, right? So
Yeah.
you've said that like fatherhood has really shaped your coaching philosophy, and I'm curious, like, what is it about parenting or your experience as a parent that has taught you about leadership that maybe is missing from other forms of leadership development?
In 2020, at the beginning of the year, I signed up for mentoring intent on earning my Master Certified Coach credential. I was working with Carly Anderson, who's a fantastic mentor, and I was familiarizing myself with coach conversation recordings that were representative of the master certified coach level. And I was like, okay, there's a gap here. I see what it is. I can bridge it. And I kind of had a plan. And then come March, life as I knew it was obliterated. My wife, who was suddenly required to work all the time and couldn't get out of it, was glued to work. Childcare no longer existed, and there I was with a 5-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. For the first few weeks, I was doing my own little riff on life is beautiful. Don't want to compare it to a concentration camp because that's a little too crass, but I was constantly trying to buoy everyone's mood and paint a glossy exterior on the abyss that was opening up inside of all of us. And it didn't work. Everything just kind of collapsed. And I just didn't see in those first few weeks how ever on earth I was going to claw back the concentration required to develop coaching skills at the Master Certified Coach level. Spoiler alert, I did later that year, but it took, stepping back and recognizing that the people I had to focus on immediately were my 2 kids. And over the following year, I stepped back from much of my work and was my son's Sherpa, I guess, as he was going through online kindergarten. And it was really hard. It was really hard for both of us. It was hours and hours of frustration every day, helping him, bring his mind to these pages, have letters fuse into words, have those words come alive with meaning, have him learn how to read expressively, have him learn how to tackle math. And it was just something that I did. And as I was doing this, there was no separation in my mind between coaching core competencies and what I was providing to him. It was like the harshest proving ground ever. And by the end of his online kindergarten year, I remember we had a little gathering where my wife's parents were there and her best friends who were visiting from out of the country, and everyone was saying, "Oh yeah, Gideon spent the last year, with his son," and it was really frustrating. And every day he was with him, and people were just like, "Wow, I can't imagine doing that," and not flipping my lid and yelling. And hearing that in that moment, I was like, wow, that never happened. I never flipped my lid and yelled at him. Was my patience tested every single day? But it was about being there, being a partner, figuring out what he needed, just providing the listening, the space that allowed him to grow into who he needed to be. And that I don't think that a coach is a parent, but a coach provides precisely that space for everyone that they're working with. And I don't think every parent does.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of this touches on some of the things you've shared earlier, right? Like it's not just a leader, like it's not just a leader problem. It's a human development reality, right?
Yeah.
The way a coach can show up for their client when done well can be very similar to how a parent shows up with their child, right? It's so interesting how much of this like panacea of human experience can kind of tie together when people are able to be vulnerable, going back to what we first discussed, right? And develop an awareness of the self, and then understanding how that's then interacting with the other. So it's really fascinating. I love hearing that as a parent, that right, and talk about stretching yourself too during this like crazy intense experience.
Yeah.
It's really amazing. And I'm glad to hear that experience ended up being, I don't know, would you say, like, how would you describe it? Like rewarding? Like, I don't know if that's the right word, but like something powerful at least.
It's going to stay with me forever. I don't know how to characterize it, just that it was
Yeah. I mean,
defining would be a good word.
yeah, right. Awesome. Well, we could obviously keep going for much longer, but we're going to wrap this up. Gideon, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience? If people want to follow more of your work, I know you publish things every now and then. Like, what would be the best way for them to do that?
I'd say two things. One, if you'd like to hear snippets of thoughts like the ones I've shared here, follow K Street Coaching on LinkedIn. I'm always trying to come up with something that can be a little thought-provoking and stretch how we think about leadership development. The other thing is, during that year of home tutelage, I was just very gun-shy about working with clients because it's a lot of money, and I didn't want to have people paying for something that would be subpar because my attention was divided. So after I earned my Master Certified Coach credential and started reaching out to peers, I was just struck by the nature of the conversations I was having with people. And I was like, oh my word, I wish more people could understand who Master Certified Coaches are. So I created a podcast called the Master Coach Collection, which doesn't talk about the journey. It doesn't talk about how you got there. It's nothing heroic. It's really, who are these practitioners? What makes them tick? How has the practice of coaching for this long and at this level shaped who they are? So I'm always very circumspect about using the word unique, but I do think it's a unique body of work and worth your attention if seasoned coaches and who we are and what makes us tick is something that you're interested in. It's the Master Coach Collection.
Awesome. Great. Perfect. Well, we'll also mention those in the recap. Gideon, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and share your perspective and have such an insightful conversation. It really is, I think, very interesting for our community to get to really think about these things in such a dynamic way. So thank you. And thanks, as always, to our audience. We'll see you next time.
And Rachel, I want to thank
Yeah.
you for what you're doing for the world of leadership development, because it's truly cutting edge and it will advance how we do this. And I want to make sure that you get credit for the really unusual, serious advancement of the field that is happening on your watch.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And obviously, we're thrilled to get to be partnering with you as well and
Yeah,
making our platform more responsive to, to really making an impact in your work.
thank you.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.